Hey guys, in this lesson, I want to talk about DIY product photography. Like I was talking about in the end of last lesson, if you don't want to pay a professional to do your product photography for you, there's always the option to do it yourself, DIY. And what's really cool is modern day iPhones actually take, or smartphones, really take very nice photography as long as you know a little bit about what you're doing and get the lighting right. So for this lesson, instead of trying to explain this myself, I'm gonna bring in my good friend Lenny, who is a photography expert, to help me explain this.
In this lesson, I'm going to show you how to do your own product photography using items you already have around the house, such as a smartphone and a bedsheet, without needing a professional setup. You may want to do this as a way to get product photos onto your listing quickly, or while you're waiting for professional photos to be taken. Now, when your budget allows, I do recommend getting professional photos taken for your product, as it is such an important aspect of your listing. However, you can also get a lot of mileage from taking your own photos, especially at the beginning. I know you might be saying, well, I'm not a professional photographer, Lenny. Don't worry, I'm going to show you exactly how anyone can do this regardless of experience. But first, let me quickly recap what you need to know about product images, specifically the main image. First, it needs to be against a white background. It needs to take up at least 85% of the image. It needs to show only the product itself with minimal or no props and no logos or watermarks or anything similar. It also needs to be at least 1000 pixels by 500 pixels in order to be zoomable on Amazon. This is really important, as Amazon states that the zoom function leads directly to an increase in sales. I know I find it frustrating when I can't zoom in on a product photo, but don't worry, for most cameras and smartphones, this isn't a problem, as the resolutions are generally much higher anyway. Now let me show you a real life example of doing this. Here's a demonstration of me putting this into practice with Greg and one of the products that we sell here at Jungle Scout. Enjoy.
All right, Lenny, so why don't you walk us through what we have set up here?
Okay, so this is very DIY. So what we started out with is 2 lamps, a bed sheet, and so what we did is that we pinned one end of the bed sheet to a table so that it has height, and then dropped that down onto the floor. So that forms the backdrop of our photos, so that no matter what angle we take the photo from, there's a white background up high. Then when it got down onto the ground, we've kind of crinkled it, but essentially we're trying to pull it out, keep it as wrinkle-free as possible, because all those little wrinkles cause shadows and that appears in the shot. So we've tried to stretch it out as much as possible. Then we've placed our product in the middle. What I did here was that I found this little doohickey to elevate our product a little bit. The reasoning for that was, if you can elevate your product a little bit and kind of separate it from the backdrop, which is the sheet here, that essentially, basically that creating that separation just helps make the background disappear. It also means that the lights can cancel out the shadows a little bit better. So now we've got our product on the sheet, we've moved the 2 lights into place, and we're moving them in from each side. And so the idea is that if you've just got one light in one direction, it's creating shadows over the other side. So by having the second light, it then sort of cancels out those shadows. So hopefully when I take some images, there won't be too many, or the shadows won't be too bad all around. And so I think now it's really just a matter of getting out my iPhone and starting to experiment with the angles. I don't know if these lights are going to be in the right spot. It'll just be a matter of playing and moving the lights around as I experiment with the photos. Is there anything I missed, Greg?
No, I think that covers it. I'd love to see what kind of shots you come up with.
All right, let's get into it. Now that you've seen me put this into practice, let's talk about some easy ways to edit these photos with no editing experience. The good news is you can also do this on your smartphone. Let's look at these keyboard tray photos and use the inbuilt iPhone photo editor. This is one of my favorite photos. I'm going to go to edit, and now I'm going to come down to this button here and go to light. The first thing I want to do is change the exposure, which is just the overall brightness of the image. Remember, what we're trying to do here is essentially eliminate the background or make it pure white so that it abides by Amazon's specifications. So I'm going to bump up the exposure as much as I can before it starts to affect the product itself. So even just that alone does a really great job, and it looks really nice and clean. So now I'm going to play with some of these other settings. We've played with exposure. Now let's look at the contrast. If I bump that up as well, that starts to help too. In this example, I probably wouldn't do too much more in the light section, but the other two areas that you could play with are the highlights and the shadows. If you've got a lot of shadows, then you can play with this a little bit to, eliminate or soften some of those shadows. Let's adjust these shadows a little bit. If you do it too much, the blacks become a little faded or milky, so just see what looks best for you. In this case, I think the image is looking pretty good. Now I'm just going to crop in as much as I can to make the image as square as possible. The way that images are displayed on Amazon is in a square, so the more that you can fill up that square size, the better. Now, what I really like about editing on the iPhone is, 1, it's very easy to do, and 2, you can play with these different settings as much as you want. You just slide them back and forth until you get it exactly where you want. And you can easily undo any of the changes that you've made. So with this particular product, there's not too much color, but if I did have a product which had more color, then you might want to bump up the saturation a little bit just to make it that little more vibrant. So that's how you can take your own product images with just an iPhone, a bedsheet, and a couple of lamps, and make what I think are some pretty professional looking photos that are perfectly usable for Amazon. Happy shooting!